The air in the penthouse office of Kwon Jae-hwa was like the air on a mountaintop, thin, cold, and dangerously clear. It smelled of money, expensive cologne, and something metallic, like unshed blood. Men spoke of Jae-hwa in whispers, calling him the Tiger of Seoul's financial district, a predator who stalked boardrooms and back alleys with the same chilling grace. His skyscraper was his territory, a glass and steel thong piercing the clouds, and from its apex, he saw everything. Secretaries, they said, were like mayflies in his presence, their careers lasting a day, maybe a week, before they were scorched by his temper or frozen by his indifference. Amelia Vance knew all of this. She had read the panicked forum posts, heard the hushed warnings from the temp agency. But her sister's hospital bills were a mountain she couldn't climb without a miracle, and this job, with its obscene salary, was the only one offered. She was 24, with skin the color of rich coffee and a history of minor catastrophes trailing her like a shadow. Her hands shook as she carried the porcelain cup, the dark liquid within trembling precariously. He was sitting behind a desk carved from a single slab of obsidian, a monument to power. Kwon Jae-hwa didn't look up. He was a masterpiece of sharp angles and controlled violence, his black suit tailored to a body built for lethal efficiency. His hair was as dark as his desk, and his focus was entirely on the document in his hand. Amelia's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Just place the coffee on the coaster. Don't trip. Don't breathe too loud. Don't exist. Her foot caught on the edge of the plush Persian rug. It was a betrayal of the highest order. The world tilted, shifting into a horrifying slow motion. The cup left her hand, an astronaut untethered, and arced through the silent, expensive air. It landed with a sharp crack on the obsidian desk, a spiderweb of fractures appearing in the fine porcelain. Hot, black coffee erupted outwards, a volcanic wave that washed over a stack of pristine white papers and splashed directly onto the immaculate white collar of Kwon Jae-hwa's shirt. Silence. A profound, suffocating silence that was louder than any scream. He lifted his head. His eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were voids, dark and depthless, and they consumed her whole. The stain on his shirt bloomed like a dark, ugly flower. His jaw muscle ticked, a tiny, seismic tremor that promised devastation. "What?" he said, his voice a low, guttural sound, like stones grinding together in the deep earth. "Have you done?" Behind him, a mountain of a man named Hyunwoo, his ever-present enforcer, took a half-step forward, his expression one of pure, murderous disbelief. Amelia couldn't breathe. She could only stare at the spreading stain, the symbol of her immediate and catastrophic failure. Amelia's apology was a strangled squeak, lost in the oppressive stillness of the office. She fumbled for the napkins she'd brought, her hands darting about like panicked birds. "I'm so sorry, sir. I tripped. I didn't mean." Her words dissolved as she lunged forward, intending to blot the mess. Her wrist knocked over a heavy crystal pen holder. It rolled across the slick, coffee-drenched surface of the desk and clattered onto the cold marble floor. Jae-hwa didn't flinch. He simply watched her, his gaze unwavering, analytical, as if observing a particularly clumsy insect right before crushing it. Hyunwoo made a low sound of disgust in his throat. "Get out," Jae-hwa commanded, the words clipped and final. He wasn't speaking to Amelia. He was speaking to Hyunwoo and another man in the room, Min-jun, whose smug, perfectly composed face was a stark contrast to Amelia's crumbling terror. Min-jun, his second-in-command, gave Amelia a look of pity so condescending it was almost worse than Jae-hwa's cold fury. They exited, the heavy office door clicking shut with an air of finality. She was alone with the tiger in his den. He rose slowly from his chair, his height more imposing than she'd realized. He unbuttoned his stained suit jacket, shrugging it off with a fluid motion and draping it over the back of his chair. Then he began to unbutton his cuffs, his movements precise and unhurried. Amelia stood frozen, her mind a blank slate of panic. He was going to kill her, right here. He would fold her up and dispose of her in the trash chute, and no one would ever know. He walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of her. He smelled of bergamot and danger. He reached out, and she flinched so violently she knocked her hip against the corner of the desk, a fresh spike of pain shooting up her side. His hand stopped, hovering in the air between them. "The file," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "The one you soaked. Give it to me." She looked down. The top file in the stack was ruined, the ink bleeding into abstract, meaningless shapes. With trembling fingers, she peeled it from the pile and held it out to him. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. A jolt, like static electricity, shot up her arm. He glanced at the ruined document, then his eyes met hers again. "Leave it. Clean this mess. Be gone from my sight." It wasn't a reprieve. It was a stay of execution. She nodded dumbly, her throat too tight to form words. As he walked towards a private washroom adjoining the office, she grabbed a wastebasket and began frantically scooping up the ruined papers, her movements jerky and inefficient. In her haste, she glimpsed a large map on the wall, dotted with pins marking shipping routes. A single red pin was placed over the port of Incheon, slightly askew, as if placed in a hurry. It was nothing. It was just a pin. But her mind, a chaotic library of useless details, catalogued its precise, imperfect position. The rest of the day was a blur of hypervigilant terror. Amelia moved through the opulent office suite like a ghost, her every step measured, her breathing shallow. She answered calls with a whispered, trembling voice, organized digital files with painstaking slowness, and jumped every time the door to Jaewa's inner sanctum opened. He had emerged 20 minutes after the coffee incident in a fresh, brutally white shirt, the stain and her near-death experience erased from existence. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her, which was somehow more terrifying than his anger. It was as if she was already gone. Late in the afternoon, Hyunwoo entered, his face a grim mask. He placed a thick binder on her desk without a word. "Mr. Kwon wants these shipping manifests cross-referenced by tomorrow morning," he grunted, his tone making it clear he thought she was incapable of using a stapler, let alone performing a complex task. Her job was on the line, her sister's future hanging by the thread of her competence. She had to do this. She stayed long after every other employee had gone home, the skyscraper groaning around her as it settled for the night. The city lights outside her window were a galaxy of indifferent stars. She worked for hours, her eyes gritty with fatigue, her mind swimming in a sea of numbers, codes, and destinations. It was around 2 a.m. when her clumsiness struck again. Reaching for a highlighter, her elbow caught the massive, precariously balanced binder. It toppled off the desk, exploding on the floor in a cascade of paper. A choked sob escaped her lips. Defeated, she sank to her knees to begin the soul-crushing task of reorganizing hundreds of pages. As she gathered the manifests, her fingers numb, she saw it. A pattern. Most shipping codes began with a standard alphanumeric sequence, KR-SL 77B. But on every third page, for shipments routed through Incheon, the code was different. Subtly different. A be replaced by an 8. It was a tiny, insignificant typo, one easily overlooked by a cursory glance. But it was consistent. A consistent mistake wasn't a mistake. It was a message. Her heart began to pound a new rhythm, not of fear, but of something else. Something sharp and focused. She remembered the crooked red pin on the map over Incheon. She looked back at the pages, her breath catching in her throat. Every single shipment with the altered code was listed as having a slightly lower cargo weight upon arrival than at departure. It was a leak, a slow, methodical, and very clever bleed. The next morning, Amelia felt as if she were walking to her own execution. The binder, now perfectly organized, felt like a bomb in her hands. She had spent the rest of the night rehearsing what she would say, her speech growing more pathetic and disjointed with each practice run. How could she, the clumsy girl who couldn't carry coffee, tell the tiger of soul that she had found a flaw in his impenetrable operation? He would laugh before he fired her. Or worse, he would think she was accusing someone and have her thrown from the roof. She entered his office with a soft knock. He was on the phone, his back to her, speaking in rapid, harsh Korean. The conversation was clearly heated. The tension in his shoulders was a palpable thing. He motioned for her to place the binder on his desk without turning around. This was her chance. She could just put it down and walk away. Forget the codes. Forget the pin. Just survive another day. But the image of her sister, pale and weak in a hospital bed, flashed in her mind. Survival wasn't enough. She needed this job. She needed to be more than just the girl who spills things. She took a deep, shaky breath. "Sir," she whispered. He ignored her, his Korean growing louder and more clipped. She took a step closer. "Mr. Kwon," he ended the call with a vicious snap, slamming the phone down into its cradle. He spun his chair around, his eyes blazing. What? The single word was a weapon. All her rehearsed words vanished. Her brain was white noise. She opened her mouth, and what came out was a pathetic stammer. The codes.
For Incheon.
They're wrong. His face remained impassive, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. "Explain." She fumbled with the binder, opening it to one of the marked pages. Her fingers shook as she pointed to the alphanumeric sequence.
"Here.
It should be KR-SL 77B. But for every third shipment from that port, it's KR-SL 778. The B is an 8. And all of those shipments, they're logged with a weight discrepancy upon arrival. Minjun, who had entered the office behind her, let out a soft, condescending chuckle. "Sir, with all due respect, she's a secretary, not a logistics expert. It's almost certainly a recurring data entry error from the Port Authority." Jaewa's gaze didn't leave Amelia's face. He was looking at her, truly looking, his dark eyes searching for something. He saw her terror, yes, but underneath it, he saw the frantic, desperate certainty. He saw the truth. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. He looked from her to the file, and then to Minjun. "Hyunwoo," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Get the port supervisor on a secure line. Verify every Incheon manifest from the last 6 months. Compare our internal codes with their source data."
Now.
The wait was excruciating. Amelia was ordered to remain in the office, standing in a corner like a chastised child while Jaewa returned to his work, the silence stretching her nerves to their breaking point. Minjun hovered near the desk, occasionally shooting her a look that was a venomous cocktail of amusement and irritation. He clearly saw her as a temporary, bizarre distraction. An hour later, Hyunwoo returned. His face was granite, but there was a new, sharp light in his eyes as he looked at Amelia. He didn't speak to Jaewa. He spoke to her. "You were right." Every head in the room turned. Jaewa slowly lifted his gaze from his monitor.
"Minun의 smiak folsert."
"The Port Authority's source data all use B," Hyunwoo continued, his voice resonating with grudging respect. "They ate. Only appears in our internal system. The change happens after the data is uploaded to our servers. It's an internal flag, a digital marker to divert a portion of the cargo at a secondary, unlocked checkpoint before it reaches our warehouse. It's been happening for months. Small amounts each time. A slow, systematic theft." Jaewa said nothing. He simply stared at Amelia, his expression unreadable. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. She had not just been right. She had uncovered a betrayal that ran deep within his own organization. She had, in her bumbling, terrified way, seen something his entire security apparatus had missed. He rose from his desk and walked towards her. For a terrifying moment, she thought he was going to strike her for exposing his organization's vulnerability. Instead, he stopped a foot away, his presence an overwhelming force field. "What else?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. "Did you see anything else?" Amelia's mind raced back to the haphazardly placed pin on the map. The pin," she stammered. "On your wall map. The one for Incheon. It's crooked. All the others are perfectly straight, pushed in all the way. That one looks like it was moved recently, put back in a hurry." Jaewa's eyes flickered to the map. He walked over to it, his movements fluid and predatory. He studied the pin for a long moment before turning back to face the room. His gaze settled on Minjun. "You were the last one to brief me on the Incheon routes, were you not, Minjun? You adjusted the pins yourself." Minjun's face had gone pale. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a sheen of cold sweat. It must have been knocked. An accident, but the denial was weak, hollow. The accusation hung in the air, thick and undeniable. And it was Amelia, the clumsy secretary, who had just hammered the first nail into his coffin. From that moment on, Amelia's world was irrevocably altered. She was no longer just the secretary. She was an asset, Jaewa's asset. He had her moved from the outer office to a small desk in the corner of his own vast suite. "You will work here," he had stated, not asked. "You will look at everything," and so she did. She was given unrestricted access to a labyrinth of data that would have made a seasoned forensic accountant weep. Financial ledgers, encrypted communications, personnel files, surveillance logs. He wanted her to find more patterns, more typos, more crooked pins. The work was terrifying and exhilarating. Her mind, which had always felt like a liability, a jumble of trivia, remembered conversations, and visual snapshots, was suddenly a powerful weapon. She found ghost employees on the payroll, their salaries being wired to an offshore account. She noticed a pattern in fuel requisitions for a fleet of delivery trucks that correlated perfectly with dates of rival gang activity, suggesting a leak of their transport schedules. Each discovery was a small thread, and she followed it, pulling it from the tangled mess until it led somewhere incriminating. Jaewa would watch her for long stretches, his chin resting on his steepled fingers, his dark eyes narrowed in concentration. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a constant, heavy weight in the room. The hours bled into one another. They were often the only two people left in the skyscraper, surrounded by the silent city. One night, she was so engrossed in tracing a series of layered bank transfers that she didn't realize he was standing behind her until he spoke. "You missed one," his voice was low, right by her ear, and a shiver traced its way down her spine. He leaned over her, his chest brushing her back, and pointed a long finger at the screen. The scent of his cologne was intoxicating, clean and sharp. "This account. It's a shell corporation. But the registration date is a holiday. It was backdated. Look at the digital signature," he was right. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The proximity of him was overwhelming, a dizzying blend of fear and a strange, burgeoning sense of safety. He wasn't just a monster. He was brilliant. He saw the world in the same way she did, as a series of patterns waiting to be deciphered. "I thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice husky. He didn't move away. He stayed there for a long moment, his warmth seeping into her, his breath stirring the fine hairs on her neck. "You are not clumsy," he said, the words a quiet revelation. "You simply see too much at once. Your mind moves faster than your body." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. The more Amelia uncovered, the more Minjun's hostility grew. He no longer bothered with condescending smiles. His looks were pure venom. He saw her not as a person, but as the instrument of his potential downfall. He started making small, passive-aggressive moves, reassigning her security clearance so she was locked out of a server, accidentally deleting a file she was working on. Jaewa reversed each move with a quiet, lethal efficiency that only seemed to infuriate Minjun further. One evening, Jaewa sent Amelia down to the archives in the sub-basement to retrieve a box of old paper ledgers. The archives were a cold, concrete labyrinth, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. She found the section she was looking for, a towering aisle of metal shelving units packed to the ceiling with cardboard boxes. She located the correct box on a high shelf and dragged over a rolling ladder. As she climbed, the metal rungs slick with condensation, she heard a faint creak from the other end of the aisle. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. There was no reply. A prickle of unease crawled up her spine. She reached for the box, her fingers straining. That's when she felt it, a violent shudder running through the entire shelving unit. She looked down. A forklift, previously parked and silent 20 feet away, was now rolling towards her aisle, its engine off, gaining speed on the slight downward slope of the concrete floor. There was no driver. Panic seized her. She tried to scramble down the ladder, but her foot slipped. She fell, landing hard on the concrete floor just as the forklift slammed into the base of the shelving unit. The impact was deafening. The massive steel structure groaned, swayed, and then began to topple over like a felled giant, a cascade of heavy boxes raining down exactly where she had been standing moments before. She screamed, scrambling backwards on her hands and knees. A shadow moved with impossible speed from the entrance of the archives. It was Jae-wha. He reached her in 3 long strides, scooping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He half-carried, half-dragged her away from the crashing shelves, shielding her body with his own as a final box exploded on the ground near them, sending shrapnel of old paper flying. He pushed her behind a thick concrete pillar, his hands gripping her arms, his body caging her in. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her with a frantic intensity she had never seen before. His control was gone, replaced by a raw, naked fury.
No,
"I think I'm okay," she gasped, her body trembling uncontrollably. He cursed a low, vicious sound in Korean. He pulled her tighter against him, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. "This was not an accident," he growled, his voice a promise of retribution. "He will not get another chance." The accident in the archives erased any remaining distance between them. Jae-wha became her sentinel. She was not allowed to go anywhere alone. Hyun-woo or another trusted guard drove her to and from her apartment. In the office, she never left his side. Her desk was moved even closer to his, until they were practically sharing the same space. The fear she felt was now constantly warring with a bewildering sense of security. Being near him was like standing next to a controlled fire. The heat was intense and dangerous, but it kept the freezing cold at bay. They worked late into the night, piecing together the final strands of Min-jun's betrayal. The backdated shell corporation was the key. Using the information he'd given her, Amelia dug into the server's access logs. She found the digital signature for the backdating. It hadn't been created by an anonymous hacker. It had been authorized from a terminal within the building. Specifically, Min-jun's terminal, at 3:14 a.m. on a Saturday 2 months prior. It was the digital smoking gun. She pointed to the screen, her hand shaking slightly.
there.
It was him. It was Min-jun, from his own office. Jae-wha stared at the proof, his face a mask of cold stone. There was no surprise, no shock, only a deep, chilling confirmation. The betrayal was absolute. He had raised Min-jun up, treated him like a younger brother, and he had been repaid with this. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering expanse of Seoul. His reflection stared back, a dark silhouette against a city of light. He aligned himself with the 5 Dragon Syndicate, Jae-wha said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He has been selling them our routes, our security protocols. The money was just a bonus. His real prize was my seat. He turned back to face her. The look in his eyes was terrifying. It was the look of a predator that had just caught the scent of its prey and was preparing for the final, brutal kill. "He thinks you are my weakness," he stated, his gaze intense. "He believes my concern for you is a flaw he can exploit. He is about to learn that what he perceives as a weakness is, in fact, his death sentence." He walked back to his desk and picked up his phone, dialing a single number. "Hyun-woo," he commanded, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Lock down the building. No one gets in or out without my authorization. Our guest will be arriving soon. Prepare a welcome for him." The hunt was over. The execution was about to begin. The attack came sooner than they expected. An alarm blared through the penthouse, a shrill, piercing sound that signaled a total security breach. Red lights flashed across the walls, bathing the opulent office in a hellish glow. "They're already inside," Jae-wha said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. He pulled a sleek, black handgun from a hidden compartment in his desk, the click of the slide racking around home echoing in the room. He grabbed Amelia's arm, pulling her behind the massive obsidian desk. "Stay down. Do not move." Gunfire erupted from the elevator lobby, the heavy crack of automatic weapons answered by the sharper reports of his guard's sidearms. Hyun-woo's voice came crackling over the intercom. "Sir, it's Min-jun. He's with the dragons. They've breached the executive floors." The office doors burst open. 2 men dressed in black tactical gear stormed in, rifles raised. Jae-wha moved with blinding speed, a blur of motion. 2 precise shots, and the men crumpled to the floor. He crouched beside Amelia, his body shielding hers. "He will come for you," he breathed, his eyes scanning the doorway. "He needs a hostage." As if on cue, Min-jun appeared, a cruel, triumphant smile on his face. He held a pistol, and behind him were more of the dragon's enforcers.
Jae-wha.
It's over. Your most trusted men are dead, and your fortress has fallen. His eyes found Amelia, cowering behind the desk. His smile widened. And you have a new vulnerability. How sentimental. All this for a clumsy secretary? Toss out your weapon, or she dies first. Jae-wha's grip on his gun tightened, but his face was a mask of calculation. This was Min-jun's fatal error. He saw Amelia as leverage. Jae-wha saw her as the reason to burn the world down. With a sudden, explosive movement, Jae-wha kicked the heavy desk. It slid across the marble floor with a deafening screech, slamming into the nearest two gunmen and giving him a precious second of cover. He fired, not at Min-jun, but at the large, plate glass window behind him. The specialized ballistic glass spiderwebbed but didn't break. Hyunwoo. Protocol Omega, he yelled into his watch. A deep thud vibrated through the building. The emergency blast shields began to descend over the windows. Min-jun's face contorted in panic. His escape route was being cut off. In his desperation, he lunged for Amelia, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her out from behind the desk. He pressed the cold barrel of his gun to her temple. "I will kill her," he screamed, his voice raw with fury. Jae-wha rose slowly, his own gun held loosely at his side. He looked at Min-jun, but his eyes were focused on Amelia. He saw her terror, but he also saw a flicker of the same resilience he'd come to admire. "You are mistaken," Jae-wha said, his voice dangerously soft. "You think she is my weakness. She is my clarity," and in that instant, Amelia did the last thing anyone expected. She stomped her heel down, hard, on Min-jun's instep, and with a surge of pure adrenaline, she bit the hand that held her. He howled in pain and shock, his grip faltering for a fraction of a second. It was all the time Jae-wha needed. A single shot rang out, impossibly fast, impossibly precise. Min-jun's eyes went wide, a perfect, dark hole appearing in the center of his forehead. He collapsed to the floor, his coup ending as swiftly and ignominiously as it had begun. The silence that followed the final gunshot was absolute, broken only by the hum of the emergency lights and Amelia's ragged breathing. The remaining enforcers, seeing their leader fall, either surrendered or were swiftly neutralized by Hyunwoo and his men as they stormed the office. The immediate threat was over, but the room was a scene of carnage, littered with bodies and shattered decor. Jae-wha didn't spare the dead a second glance. He moved to Amelia, his eyes locked on her, taking in her wide, shocked eyes and the tremor in her hands. He gently took her by the shoulders, his thumbs stroking her arms as if to soothe away the violence she had just witnessed. "You're safe," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "It's over," she could only nod, her throat tight. She looked at the body of Min-jun, then back at Jae-wha. He had killed a man in front of her without a moment's hesitation, and yet, all she felt from him now was a fierce, unwavering protectiveness. His priorities were laid bare, her safety above all else. He led her away from the chaos, into his private quarters behind the office. He sat her down on a soft leather couch and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. They were so cold. "You were brave," he said, his gaze searching hers. "What you did, that took courage. I was scared," she whispered, the words trembling. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he replied, his voice a low, intimate rumble. "It is acting in spite of it." He raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was so tender, so at odds with the ruthless man she knew him to be, that it made her heart ache. "Amelia," he said, her name a soft prayer on his lips. "When I saw him put his hands on you, I understood something. This empire, this building, all of it is worthless if you are not in it. You are not my weakness. You are my reason." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock, of relief, of a profound, overwhelming emotion she couldn't yet name. He had seen past her clumsiness, past her fear, and found the part of her she didn't even know existed. He saw her mind, her strength. In his violent, dangerous world, she had become the unshakable center. He stood, pulling her to her feet. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her flush against his chest, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. She leaned into his embrace, her fear finally giving way to a sense of belonging. The city lights glittered outside the window, a silent audience to their new beginning. The Tiger of Soul had found his unlikely partner, not a warrior or a queen, but a clumsy girl with a brilliant mind who had accidentally stumbled into his life and rearranged his entire world. And he would never let her go.